thank you, Sir Jeffrey, for coming on the podcast. We're very excited to meet you. It's obviously a crazy run up to the election. Very, I'm sure, very exhausting for you. How are you feeling at the minute?
Yeah, it's been a very busy period. I've been virtually to every part of Northern Ireland, from County Fermanagh all the way up to the north coast and down in the Mournes, and right up to the northwest. So it's what it does, apart from being out canvassing and supporting my candidates across Northern Ireland, it just reminds me just how beautiful this country is when you get out. I've been last week I was driving up from Omagh through the Spurns, and it was just beautiful countryside, and it's a timely reminder that we're really fortunate to live in such a lovely country, quite apart from the travails of canvassing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because every time I see you on Twitter, it's like you're in Omagh 1 minute and then you're somewhere far away the next. It's like I'd love to know what your fuel bill is like. The
secret is the TARDIS.
So, what's in terms of like how you look after yourself when it comes to the run up to the election? Like, are you sleeping okay? Do you get downtime, or is it just, do you know you're going to run yourself into the ground at this point and you'll pick up the pieces later on, kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean it is very busy. There's no doubt about that, and in terms of campaigning, you work basically Monday right through to Saturday. I try and get a day off on Sunday, but even then, occasionally you've got some media things to do, but generally Sunday is my down time during the campaign. I love getting out onto the country roads for a walk. So last Sunday, for example, I went out and walked about 5 miles just around the country roads in County Down. That's great a great way of clearing your head. And throughout the election campaign, I've been listening to A Short History of Ireland by Jonathan Barden, which you might think, what on earth would someone want? Why would you want to listen to extracts from Irish history when you're doing an election campaign? But actually, it's just I have an interest in history, and it's been a great way of just reconnecting with the events that have shaped this place and actually continue to shape the politics of Northern Ireland. It also, I think, helps set in context, some of the big debates that we're having at the moment. So yeah, I mean, for 6 days of the week, it is hard going. There's no doubt about it. I'm still a member of Parliament. I've still got my constituency work to do. I was over in London on Wednesday taking part in Northern Ireland questions and Prime Minister's questions. So I've got that still to do. And you're out campaigning. I've 18 constituencies with candidates to support. I've got to canvass half of this constituency with Paul Given covering the other half. So I've been out every evening for Monday to Saturday, out on the doors in Dromore, Dromara, Annahilt, Moira, Hillsborough, Dunmurry, Seymour Hill, getting around, talking to people. But that's a great leveler, just having the time on doorsteps to not just to talk to people, but to listen to their concerns.
I suppose in the time involved in something like that as well, it is a commitment beyond the normal commitment, and I suppose in the game developing side of things, like this is the point we come to the crunch. There's a deadline. It has to be done by that deadline, and there is no slippage. Absolutely. There's no point canvassing after
midnight on the 4th of May. Indeed, if you went to somebody's door at midnight, the 4th of May, I think you get chased. We're aiming to have finished our door knocking, our canvassing by this weekend, and then next week it will be leafleting Eva poll. So you go right to the very end of the campaign, but there is, you've got to compress all that you need to do in an election campaign into that. It's effectively a 3.5 week period where you've really got to go for it, and it's like a huge job interview, really. I mean, people perhaps don't recognise this, but effectively you're putting yourself before an interview panel, which is the electorate. And in the case of Lagan Valley, that's about 65,000 people who have a vote in this constituency. So you've got to go out and make your pitch. And that's not a one interview for half an hour in somebody's office. That's on every doorstep that you can get to. And sometimes those conversations are short. Necessarily, people are busy, but sometimes they're longer conversations.
I suppose it's really interesting listening to what you're saying in regards to when you have your downtime and listening to this, the short history of Ireland in that respect. Do you think there's a level of importance that history doesn't have, that we should all be really listening to something or reading something about that as well to get a full understanding of the backgrounds where all our candidates are coming from, because it is so diverse?
Well, that's right, and I think that we could do more in our education system. For example, when I was at school, we learned about Irish history, but a lot has changed since that time, and we've had the agreement, we've had the peace process, and I just worry a little that the new generation that's growing up, and it's fantastic that they're growing up in a Northern Ireland that is at relative peace, where we have a degree of normality I didn't experience or enjoy in my childhood. But at the same time, I think there is at the moment a risk that we take the peace process and what we have too much for granted, that maybe our young people don't fully understand what we've been through, how we got here, the sacrifices, the enormous sacrifices that have been made to get us to this moment and this point on our journey, our collective journey in Northern Ireland. So, I think if we're going to build a shared future in Northern Ireland, we need to have a better understanding of our shared history. And that's why I've been listening to Jonathan Barden, because if I'm going to take on something as hugely important as the post of First Minister in Northern Ireland, I think it's important that we understand our shared history as well as what we need to do to build a shared future. And so that's why I've been, I have a good knowledge of Irish history, but I've been revisiting that again. And it's, and the relationship between the UK and this island, the relationship between the two parts of the island and how that has evolved. I think it's important to understand that if we're going to, build that shared future in Northern Ireland that we want, where we have people working together for the common good.
Yeah, I think the most important thing when it comes to developing that idea of the history being taught and the commonality of the history as well, not a spin on one side of history or the other, which is something we could always worry about in that respect.
I agree in a narrative, but I'd say that's probably very challenging, isn't it?
It is.
It's a difficulty in the education system, people feeling that contentious issues is something maybe should be dealt with at home.
Indeed, yeah, no, that's right. And yet, the one when you listen, even to the, you listen to something like A Short History, and Jonathan Barden wrote it very, very well. But it does also demonstrate the complexity of our history. Absolutely. Sometimes political commentators, in particular, paint things in very black and white terms, and it is not like that. The complexity of our history has contributed to where we are today. And I think we don't fully understand or appreciate that the journey we have undertaken across the centuries to get to where we are today is actually quite complex. It's taken a number of twists and turns that if we don't understand those, then we don't fully appreciate why we're here and what we need to do to build that shared future.
We would be both very clear in that regard to look at the lens of what somebody else is looking at and how that portrays their vision of what
maybe absolutely. And I often liken politics in Northern Ireland to a journey, and you've heard me use that description in this interview quite often. Sometimes, in at least on part of that journey, maybe we need to learn what it's like to walk in the other person's shoes, and I don't think we do enough of that. And one of the things, if I can be, and certainly don't want to be, too party political here, but I think at times, people don't step back enough and take a long look at why. So why are people out on the streets protesting against the protocol, for example? Instead of just saying, we don't agree with that, they shouldn't be doing that. Shouldn't we be seeking to understand what motivates people? What is their concern? What is their fear? I think John Hume and others of his era did that particularly well. They sought to understand, what is the fear that drives the concern of the other person. I remember once I had the privilege of being in South Africa, and we met a number of the South African political leaders at that time, and listening to them, that was a big part of their journey, was understanding how the other person felt, because in any negotiation, in any political agreement, it's not just enough to seek to get what you need. It's also understanding what your opponent needs, so that together you can reach an agreement. I think at times in Northern Ireland we don't do enough of that, and I think we need to do more of, learning to walk in the other person's shoes, so that we understand where they've come from on their journey. And in understanding that, we have a better chance that our paths will align as we go forward.
And in terms of, so obviously you're a dad, you're a husband, and you've...
Now a granddad as well.
You're obviously, it's clear you'd love to instill that in your family, of that kind of trying to understand where, and especially probably through your Christian faith as well, the idea of walking in someone else's shoes and trying to, promote that cohesion in society. When it comes to, when you get criticisms in the media for whatever stance you've taken, how does that impact you? How does that impact your family? Do you ever get a call from your wife or your kids upset about something someone's written about you that you think that is just totally, you think, unfair?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're all human. Believe it or not, politicians are also human. And it can be difficult at times. I think that I've seen over the last few years a change in the way that politics is reported in Northern Ireland, and I think that and this is particularly the case in Northern Ireland, more so here than even in the Republic or in Great Britain, that there is this new concept, this new way of reporting politics, which is about political commentary. And actually we get journalists who also style themselves as political commentators. And they give their own opinion. They critique what politicians say, but they set it against the backdrop of their own opinion.
Yeah. And
some of them can be quite harsh, and some of them can be, I think at times, that they lean so much on their own opinion that they lose perspective on, because in the end they're supposed to be informing the public. But I think we hear more of their own opinion than we do of a fair and balanced summary of what politicians are saying, or a fair and balanced critique of what politicians are saying. And I think some of the political commentators we have in Northern Ireland, at times, I think they go over the top. I think some of them are quite harsh in the words that they use. I think some of them say things about politicians and political parties that are not merited, that are, I think, that cross the line between political commentary and language that I think is just unnecessary. Northern Ireland's a very diverse place in its politics, and we have to make room for that diversity. We, even if we don't agree with someone's politics, I think we have to, if the job of a political reporter or commentator ought to be to interrogate and to interpret political viewpoints for the wider public.
Yeah.
And I think sadly in Northern Ireland we're moving away from that, and what we're getting is people with their own opinions, and they see themselves more as political influencers rather than reporters or commentators. And I'm not sure that's a healthy thing for Northern Ireland, because it means that the public is not getting a fair assessment of what politicians are saying and what politicians are doing. It's not balanced. And one of my greatest frustrations, and I think for my family as well, I mean, my family see the amount of time that I spend dealing with the day-to-day issues that matter to people, the bread and butter issues. Every day we're dealing with those issues. That never gets reported by the media, and it's kind of like the proverbial iceberg. What the media comment upon is the tip of an iceberg, and beneath that there is so much activity that goes on in politics and that politicians do to help people and make a real change for good in people's lives. But that never sees the light of day. And I think that's sad, because I think it gives the public a misconstrued understanding. It gives the public, I think, an unbalanced understanding of what all politicians do.
You feel it's like a more of a one-dimensional view of what a politician's life is really
Absolutely.
like, as opposed to what the nuances is
I think
referred to.
I think much of the political commentary in Northern Ireland gives you the cardboard cutout and not the real thing.
I think the point Damien has made is very clear in that respect. You've signed up for this. You've dedicated your life to politics in that respect. Your family didn't. And I suppose that's something they've had to buy into and support you. I mean, do you lean an awful lot then on family and its widest sense?
Well, it is very difficult. You can ask any politician and they will tell you that, the amount of time you have to devote. Politics is a vocation. And it is more than a full-time occupation. It really, it even when, if I can use this term, you're off duty. You're still, the thought processes continue. You're thinking ahead to things that you need to be doing and what decisions you need to make. And when you're a political leader, that is even more so the case. So having downtime with your family is important, and it's difficult. It's very, those moments are precious. I've recently become a grandfather, and and that was 5 weeks ago, and about 4 of those weeks I've spent out in the campaign trail and haven't been able to get the time I'd like to have, and with family at such an important time as this. So politicians, for all their imperfections and shortcomings, do make big sacrifices, and when you step out into the public square as a politician, and that's no one compels you to go into politics. So I'm not here, as it were, saying that we make our own decisions and we make our own choices, and we are responsible for that. But at the same time, I do think that unfortunately there isn't a full understanding of just how hard most politicians work, and that people are motivated to go into politics because they want to change things for the better.
In terms of the impact on yourself, now we touched a little bit about it earlier on, but in terms of that, how do you manage stress? Does it ever get too much? Do you have people in your party that you talk to say I'm having a rubbish day because they've said this about me which isn't true, they've said this about me isn't true, about this coming up, I feel overwhelmed by it? Do you have that within your party, or is it more we all need?
Well, for me, my Christian faith is very important. I think that if I didn't have my faith, it would certainly be more of a struggle when you're going through difficult times. And in politics, you'll have good days and not so good days. There are times when you feel it's very challenging. You've big decisions to make. You have a big interview to do. You read things in the media that completely misrepresent your position, and you feel frustrated. Yeah. It is good to have supportive colleagues. It's good to have your family who are able at times to provide wise counsel. Sometimes, it is good just to have people who are not up at the coalface of politics, who are if you like, have stepped back a bit, and they can see things from more of a distance, and maybe have a perspective that is helpful in terms of understanding and getting things into perspective. So it's good to have that. It's good to be able to sit down with family members and and hear their opinion, even at times when that might be a critical opinion, but that doesn't do any harm, because they're the people you tend to listen to.
They are, and they know you, and they know what gets to you. They know what they can do to support you in that respect as well. Constructive criticism on any level is always good criticism, because at least it gives you something to think about. At least you will go away and think about it. When's the last big thing that you've listened to a family member and then just thought, actually, I've got that wrong?
Yeah. That's a very good question. Sometimes it's just down to individual interviews that, will say, well, you might have done that differently. It's good to have that perspective, because they can sit back. They know, what you're like. They know what you think. And sometimes maybe, in an interview you don't convey that well, or you just an interview takes you off at a tangent and you don't get talking about the things you'd like to be talking about. So it's good to have, that family perspective on things, and certainly, in terms of political decisions as well, it's good to be able to sit down and just say, look, what do you think about this? Or, and very often they say, well, actually I was talking to so-and-so this week and, this was their view. And at times we're so busy as politicians that, we at election time, there's a lot of talking and listening. But in between elections, you're running to Parliament, you're running to Stormont, you're in meetings, and you do meet a lot of constituents, but often it's about issues that, are the issue that's important to them at that time. So it's good to get that more rounded perspective from family and friends.
You talked about, obviously, maybe sometimes you won't always convey yourself as you would hope in an interview or whatever. Who is your least favourite person to be interviewed by?
That's a very good question. I mean,
is not current company accepted?
No, absolutely. No. You guys wouldn't even.
That was damned by being praised there.
So that was very clever. Look, I mean, there's interviewers are doing their job, and my starting point in doing any interview is to respect the person who's asking the questions, to respect that they have a job to do. Different interviewers are different styles. And I'm reluctant to use names, but I'll use the names of two very successful journalists in Northern Ireland. So I've been interviewed many times by Paul Clarke on UTV and by Mark Carruthers on the BBC. And I would say that Paul Clarke's style, I mean, Paul is not afraid to ask you the difficult questions, but his style of interviewing, I think he gets more out of an interview because he allows the interviewee to speak, to expand upon their viewpoint. Mark tends to be a bit more tenacious, and you are lucky if you get half the answer out before Mark interrupts you with the next question, and maybe in some ways he would feel that he does get things out of an interview, but I just find I often walk away from interviews with Mark and feel that the interview that we didn't, that there were many things I would like to have said and which the public might want to have heard and didn't get to hear and expand upon. And I think that's important. I think a good interviewer gets the most out of their interviewee, the person they're interviewing. And I think that should really, at the end of the day, an interview shouldn't be, about, almost like a boxing match. It shouldn't be like that. In fact, it's probably more like a game of chess than it is a boxing match. It's the viewing public, and what I hear very often from people who take an interest in politics is they don't like squabbling. They hate interviews where they've 3 or 4 people on a panel and they're squabbling and fighting with each other. They actually don't like that. Yeah. That turns the public off politics. The public want to hear, what are you going to do for us? I mean, that is, in the end, that's what they want to hear from their politicians. They want to hear, what are you going to do for us? What's your idea? How are you going to fix this? We know what the problems are. Yeah. What's your solution? They want to hear solutions. Whereas I think very often interviewers and journalists they're looking for a headline. So they're trying to provoke the interviewee into saying something that will give them the headline. And I'm not sure that's what the public are. I think the public want to hear, they want to hear solutions, answers. They want to know what's going on.
It's a solution-focused activity you're trying to do in that
Absolutely.
respect, but you're maybe being faced with somebody who's trying to get the problems to the fore. It's that idea of working within a soundbite generation now, as we always do in levels of interviews and stuff that I have done in the past as well. We could talk at length, but you only get 10, 15, 20 seconds. That's publicised in that point, and it's not what suits you. And you understand, I agree with you about the idea they have a job to do. It suits the narrative of the interviewer, and I suppose that comes back to that initial point about bringing an opinion to a piece as opposed to reporting. Do you feel that has got, and you have alluded to it, it's got more difficult to get that message
I do.
across due to the opinion, the block of an opinion?
We live in the Twitter world now, so how many characters is it, and you've got to get your message into that. So videos are now, if your video is longer than 7 seconds, forget it. It's that kind of world that we inhabit. So it is the world of the soundbite. The number of times I've had people say to me when we've met and had time, I've talked to people, discussed with them. People say, "Gosh, you're very different from the person we see on the TV," and that's because interviews are very often combative. They are very narrowly focused. They don't get into the personality. It is about sound bites. And in some cases, in some interviews, half a soundbite, because that's all. That's the only chance you get something out. You get half of it out. And I'm not sure that is good. I remember back in the day when, you would have had longer interviews. And I mean, I did an interview last evening with Mark Carruthers on The View, and it was 20 minutes. Much better interview. Much better. It covered so much more ground. And I think that, the public will have got a lot more out of that. And Mark was, he was, very professional. He was incisive. He asked the difficult questions, as he always does. Mark is good at his job, but I think when you're doing a 5-minute interview with Mark, it becomes very difficult. And actually, we've measured the amount in a 5-minute interview. The interviewer speaks as much as the interviewee, and I don't think that should be the balance at all. I think people want to hear what the interviewee, what the politician or the minister has to say, rather than what the interviewer has to say. So I think the public is not served well by the soundbite approach to reporting these days, or the sensationalist approach. I think the public want to hear the detail. The thing that encourages me greatly about politics is the public are capable of making their own mind up. The public are capable of working things out for themselves, and they actually don't need to be fed a drip diet or the sound bites. They don't thrive on sound bites. The public actually want to know the detail. They want to understand what politicians are trying to do. And they're much more discerning, I think, than the media at times give them credit for.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen that film, the documentary, The Social Dilemma.
I haven't, no.
It's brilliant. It's all about how social media is kind of zombifying us. And it's everything about it is designed to lure you in and keep you staring at the screen. It's the noises, the pings, the 7-second sound bites, as you said. So I wonder, is that just the tech industry, the way it is, and the way everyone's news is consumed on our phones now?
Well, I think there's a lot in that. I think also because of this 24-hour news agenda, and everything is instant, and it's the race to get the news first. Mm-hmm. There's something is lost in all of that. Analysis, I think, is lost in all of that. Understanding why are these things happening? What's the background to this? Now, there is some very good online information you can get. In fairness, there are people who do podcasts. There are people who do online, and they'll put out a blog with a fairly detailed assessment. I just wonder how many people these days read that. And I think that we're losing something because of it. But it also influences politics, because the more we rely on the big soundbite, the sensational headline to make the news, to catch attention, the more people who have not the best of motives are inclined to do things that are sensational to catch the news agenda as well. And I think this was brought into stark relief in 9/11 when we saw the dreadful events that had happened in New York and Washington and so on. And when I looked at that at the time, I thought, this is not good, because there are people who want to catch the attention of the world, and they're having to do more and more extreme things to do that, and that worries me. And I'm not apportioning blame for that. I'm just saying that the more that we make reporting of politics and news about the sensational headline, the short soundbite, the more I think there are those who are apt to do things that are extreme and to sensationalise, to get their message across. They feel they've got to sensationalise something. I think that's not a good thing either.
Do you think Jim Monster's maybe a bit guilty of that in how he conveys some of his messages? I know he's an extremely bright guy and extremely talented litigator. Do you think there's times when he doesn't maybe represent himself as well because he leans towards the more extreme kind of presentation of views?
There's no doubt that at times it can be very difficult for any politician. Sometimes you've got a hard message you've got to put across. I think it's as much about the delivery as it is about the content of what you say. It's about how you say it. And I do think at times there are some politicians who perhaps come across as quite harsh. And yeah, they've got tough things to say and things that I understand. But I think, saying them harshly is not, and I'm certainly not a political wimp. I'm not, I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I'm not afraid to hold a view, to take a principled stand on something that I believe passionately about. But I think it's also important to temper our language, to consider how we say what we say.
The impact of what we say as well, in regards to, if you go back to the point you said about that soundbite and the sensationalism of it, then it's taken out of context and used inappropriately. Absolutely. And it's used to stoke flames which don't need stoking at times. Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And again, that's why, it's sometimes I think that when people are putting a message across, the content of the message is lost in the volume. Mm-hmm. And that what people hear is the volume and not necessarily the content. So I find, in my opinion, that you can if you've something tough you need to say, but you can say it in a more gentle way, people will listen.
So that gets into that sort of question. You've touched on it in regards to the amount of time you spent on politics and your own values and your own principles in that respect as well. How do you marry the two? How do you marry your very clear principles by which you stand with a Northern Ireland that is now maturing, growing up, being more inclusive, being more, and don't take this in a slight now, being more tolerant in that respect.
Yeah.
And I think the word woke has been misused so many times in that respect, because what Northern Ireland is doing, it's building a tolerance and inclusion across itself. You're very clear in your values, you're very clear in your principles, but you are wanting to lead a Northern Ireland that is growing and maturing that way. How do you put the two of those together?
It is difficult, and I think it does come back to what I've just been saying, that there is nothing wrong, and indeed I think it is desirable to have people in politics who have principles and things they believe in. I mean, what won't work in Northern Ireland is if we all stand on the centre ground, because the people who don't necessarily feel they are on the centre ground then feel isolated, and that's not a good thing. And history teaches us that that's not a good thing, which is why at times I will go and speak and listen to people I don't necessarily agree with, but I think it's important as a leader that you understand where people are coming from, you understand their concerns, and you give voice to those concerns in a way that it enables us to deal with issues in a respectful and a peaceful way. So I think it is more often how you say things and the tone that you use. So I'm a unionist. I'm passionate about my unionism, but I recognise the need to project that unionism in a way that respects the views of others. And I think you've used the word tolerance. To that I would add the word respect. At times I find that some of those who call for tolerance are not always the most respectful of people who have a different viewpoint from theirs. I don't think that the definition of tolerance is that your view is the only valid view and that others should tolerate your view. But I think that tolerance is a two-way street and respect is a two-way street. And at times I think we hear the narrative, but we don't necessarily see the actions that back up that narrative. And I do think what I want to see is a fairer society in Northern Ireland. I want to see a more respectful society, which is not about to use the kind of parents you see sometimes on social media, them's and us'ns, but that it is, if people want to earn respect for their culture and identity, they also need to show respect for the culture and identity of others. And I think that's what building a more inclusive society means. It doesn't mean that we're all the same. It doesn't mean that we all think the same, that we all speak the same. What it does mean is that we're respectful to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that point in regards to the centre ground just doesn't solve all of the problems. No. We did a thing in work there recently in regards to just briefly look at voting patterns since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, where effectively in that time it was a centrist politics, but the Westminster elections have just gone partisan, bipartisan politics in that respect, and the same has happened in regards to the votes for the executive as well, or the assembly as well. That it has become more extreme. So the question I would ask there is, do you feel that's people holding their ground? The phrase that's been put out, the politics of fear side of things, or is that people who feel more comfortable in expressing their own individual identity and want to see that flourish within a modern Northern Ireland?
I think actually it's probably a bit of both. I don't think you can say that it's all this or all that. I think some people are confident enough in their identity and who they are that they don't feel threatened by anybody else. But I do think there are, on all sides in Northern Ireland, people who are fearful about the future and are fearful that maybe their identity is being diminished or eroded. I think we need to understand that. I often compare the peace process with bridge building, and I think it's a good analogy. And the centre ground you might describe as the bridge. Mm-hmm. But you can't suspend a bridge from midair. Mm-hmm. A bridge only works as a crossing point if you've two strong supports, one on either side. And I just worry that in the politics of Northern Ireland, we don't recognise enough the need to ensure that the supports on both sides of that bridge are strong. Mm-hmm. A weakened and divided nationalism or a weakened and divided unionism doesn't provide the strong supports that we need to build this bridge to a shared future. And therefore, it is not to my benefit that nationalism is weakened and divided, but equally it should not be to the benefit of nationalism or anyone that unionism is weakened and divided. Mm-hmm. The stronger and more confident people feel in themselves, the better the chance is that we build this bridge to a shared future. And I think, if I may, I think the parties in the centre ground at times lose sight of that. And at times can become consumed with their own sense of, that they've got it right and everybody else has got it wrong. And I don't think that is the approach. I think respect, again, has to be that two-way process. And it is evident the middle ground is growing in Northern Ireland. Yeah. And, that is the product of the peace process and the changing environment in which we operate today. But politics in Northern Ireland will only work, and the journey to a shared future will only be successful if we bring people with us. And that has to be people from across the community divide. You will not build that bridge exclusively from the centre out. You've also got to build the strong supports on either side that will enable the bridge to be stable.
But it was a bridge, if you don't mind me saying, that you had very serious concerns about at the very start of the Good Friday Agreement and continue to sort of with those concerns. I think for us in Northern Ireland, it's probably the only bridge that we can see at this moment of time. And to extend that metaphor, that construction of that bridge, the optics of walking away from it has maybe followed you on that journey over the time as well. So I don't know, Damien, if you think that.
It's interesting you're talking about kind of everyone being respectful, and it's, I definitely get what you're saying in terms of that very, that at the moment, obviously you've taken a step back, and because of issues with the protocol, legitimate issues, and you're representing who votes for you. In terms of respect and bringing people in, it was kind of, it's just, I know this is probably a bit of a tangent, but it's just popped into my head.
Yeah, sure, of course.
And my brain does that sometimes, I go on all sorts, but I'm curious, Arlene, Foster very famously said about the crocodile comment, which was, probably, I think, fairly seen as a bit disrespectful, but then at the same time, she goes to the GAA games and she attended Martin McGuinness's funeral and reached out the hand of friendship. So it's just interesting. There's a very human side to politics where, people can do things which aren't really very nice to the other community, but then at the same time go, oh, actually, I'll reach out the hand of friendship. Do you think there's things that you can do more to kind of reach out the hand of friendship and that maybe Michelle O'Neill can do more? Or is there stuff that you'd like to share with us now that maybe doesn't get the headlines that maybe I don't know about, where you're kind of reaching out the hand of friendship in terms of the cultural, GAA, 12th kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that, we can always go further, all of us, in terms of reaching out. Just going back to the very, valid question about the bridge. If we take the bridge as the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement, back in 1998, we were looking at the plans. We didn't have a bridge, but we had the plans. And I suppose, my concern was that I saw flaws in the plans that I felt were going to weaken the foundations of the bridge. And it came to pass that was the case. But when the referendum was held in 98, I accepted the outcome and I dedicated myself to, I bought a cement mixer and I made some cement and we poured it into the foundations and we made it stronger. And I've got a new cement mixer because I want to strengthen the foundations. I am not about blowing up the bridge. Mm-hmm. I'm about strengthening the bridge so that it can serve its purpose. And, the protocol, I think, weakens the bridge at the moment because it has left at least one side of the bridge feeling weaker. Its position in the protocol has been disrespected, and I think we need to deal with that. So I want to strengthen the foundations of our political institutions so that they work for everyone. I'm looking forward to the opportunity of serving in ministerial office at Stormont, and I do want to use that as an opportunity to reach out. And to recognise, not only to promote my own identity, my own tradition, but also to understand better the identity and traditions of others. For several years I chaired the Northern Ireland World War I Centenary Committee, and we were tasked with bringing forward appropriate arrangements to mark the centenary of the First World War. And that was a war in which people, as many Catholics as Protestants died on the Western Front. As many nationalists as unionists died on the Western Front. At the Battle of the Somme, there were as many Irish volunteers as there were Ulster volunteers who died on that very bloody and muddy battlefield. I don't think that was understood fully by both sides. I think unionists looked to the Somme as the moment when they secured their right to exist separately. That the sacrifice at the Somme persuaded the British government to grant Northern Ireland separate status. Equally, the Irish volunteers reckoned that their sacrifice gave them the right to negotiate what became the Irish Free State. But again, I come back to the point, that is shared history. At the Battle of Messines and in Flanders, the Irish Division and the Ulster Divisions fought side by side. When Major Willie Redmond, the brother of John Redmond, the then leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, was shot and mortally wounded at Messines, he was stretchered off the battlefield by Orange men from the Ulster Division. You imagine the symbolism of that, this nationalist MP, Willie Redmond, who'd answered the call, put on a British uniform, fought on the Western Front, killed by German bullets, stretchered off the battle. He was still alive at this time, stretchered off by an Orange man from County Antrim. And, people fought and fell side by side in that great war and sacrificed themselves. The Irish volunteers felt they were there and that in their service they would help deliver the independence they wanted. The Ulstermen were there and felt that in their service they would deliver the outcome they wanted for their part of the island. But that is our shared history.
Yeah.
And so we set about during that period having shared events, reaching out across the community, helping people in East Belfast to understand that there were many Catholics and nationalists and Irish volunteers who died at the Somme, as well as the UVF, the Ulster volunteers, going to Dublin and taking part in events there as part of the centenary to recognise that this was an Island of Ireland experience. So, I'm passionate about us having a better understanding of our shared history, because I think that is part of the key to building the shared future that we want. And that's why I think, yes, it's not just about making the gestures. I think it is about deepening our understanding of where we've come from on our journey. It's not just about where the signpost tells us we're going in the future. It's actually about where the signpost tells us we've come from. And I think the more we understand that, the better the chance we will have of building the reconciliation that's needed in Northern Ireland.
I was going to ask you, because I'm conscious of time here, because I know you probably have a million things to do, and this room is very hot. Double jobbing, are you guys allowed to do it? Because I read one thing to say you were, and then I read another thing to say you guys are not allowed to do it, but then there might be a temporary allowance. Are you guys allowed to work as an MP in an MLA?
No. If you're elected to Parliament and you're a member of the Assembly, you have to step down from the Assembly. If you're a member of Parliament and elected to the Assembly, then you have to step down from Parliament. You can't hold both positions. Personally, I feel that there is some room for a little bit of flexibility to be introduced. I think that if someone is elected to the Assembly and then is subsequently elected to Westminster in a general election, or vice versa, someone is elected to Parliament but then is elected to the Assembly, I think there should be some degree of overlap there, whereby for up to the period of the next election, they could hold both positions on a temporary basis. But that would have to be a voluntary arrangement. It's not something that would be mandatory. But at the moment, it is the case that if you're elected to one, then you have to step down from the other.
And what will that look like for you then, running into this election?
Well, if I'm elected to the Assembly, and I take nothing for granted, that will be a decision for the people of this constituency in Lagan Valley. If I'm elected to the Assembly, then I will have to step down as MP.
Which will trigger a by-election?
Yes, that's right. And if a member of the Assembly steps down, that triggers a co-option. So those are the current arrangements.
In the past, when politicians were allowed the so-called double job, did you get paid for both?
No.
So you got one salary?
That's right. You get paid for in the past, where you were a member of the Assembly and a member of the Parliament, you get paid as a member of Parliament, and you got an office allowance for the Assembly, but not a salary.
You've been very generous with your time, Sir Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Very interesting. The whole kind of point of our podcast was to get people to understand politicians on a kind of a human level, because exactly like you touched on earlier on, the short 5-minute interviews, you don't get to get your point across, and I think on a personal level, you're very enjoyable to listen to and very easy to talk to, so thank you very much. And
I'd reiterate that as well. Yeah, I think it's been very enlightening in that respect.
Well, and thank you both for the opportunity. It's good to be able to sit down and talk expansively and probably too much. But thank you.
No, perfect.